On Islamic frontiers of China and the Silk Road, a fascinating talk on the effects of some 1,500 years of Islam on China. Wang Haoman is chairman of the China Research and Exploration Society. Being China's most accomplished explorer, Time magazine honoured Wang Haoman as one of their 25 Asian heroes. In a career spanning almost 40 years of exploration in remote China, together with neighbouring countries, Haoman is a veteran at the National Geographic, having led 6 major expeditions for the magazine. In 1986, he founded the China Exploration and Cultural Heritage and Research Society, which expanded his exploration work to conservation of China's natural and cultural heritage. He's authored many books, and his work has been featured often on CNN, National Geographic Channel, and in many other media. This lecture accompanies the recent publication of Mr. Wang's book, Islamic Frontiers of China. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me with welcoming Wang Haoman.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, today, April 4th, growing up in Hong Kong is for us the Children's Day. I remember in those days when I was in elementary school, when you go to a movie house, you may need, well, you buy the tickets for a particular movie, but always before the actual movie starts, you're shown a little cartoon. And that cartoon has nothing to do with the main theme. So since this is Children's Day today, we're going to show you a little animation film to start. All right? Anyway, maybe we show it at the end instead. Actually, okay, just stop it. Okay, that's actually a video made by some high school student out near the wetland parks in New Territories. But we'll show that later on because of that technical problem. Let's get back to the computer. Forget about that film. Yes. There's a small hiccup. All right. Now, for some of you that has listened to me speak before, you have seen this title slide that we have used for 20 years. It was taken on the Silk Road. However, for me, I haven't spoken on this topic for 17 years. The last time I spoke on this was 1994. Of course, it doesn't mean I haven't been up to the Silk Road. It's just that it is a hot topic. Okay, so, and now because of the relaunch of a new book with the added chapter, so I decided that this time, it was just launched 2 weeks ago in London. I was there for the book launch. So I decided when Rupert asked me about this year's topic, I said, well, let's go for Islamic Frontiers of China. So, now, anyhow, this relief map of China, when we talk about the Islamic frontiers of China, you're really mainly talking about this whole region of Central Asia. This is Xinjiang province here. This is the Tibetan Plateau. However, actually, later on during my lecture, you will find out that Islam in China is not only confined to this western frontiers. You have the deep depression here, which is the Taklamakan Desert, including the lowest level of China, which is minus 153 meters. That, despite that, it's that far inland. But in general principle, we're mainly going to be talking about that region. And in particular about Xinjiang, you can see this second largest moving desert in the world, the Taklamakan. And it is all within Xinjiang. This is the Kunlun Mountains to the south, the Tian Shan to the north, the Pamirs down here, the Karakoram. So it's all enclosed by very high mountain ranges. Now, the Taklamakan Desert, in Uyghur language, it means going in without coming out. And certainly, you know, it lives up to that fame. It was a very hostile area filled with desert until, of course, now it's struck oil and gas. You know, that's something more contemporary. But in historical times, it's extremely barren. Very few people will go through it, except some camel caravans. That started over 2,000 years ago, and even before the birth of Christ. All right. During the Western Han Dynasty, as early as the year 138 BC, the emperor already sent his emissary to go to the western frontier, searching for the famous blood horse. Now, Zhang Xian was sent out there to the western frontier to locate these horses. He went for 13 years, and 10 of those years, actually, he was in captivity, being captured by those kingdoms in the west. And you can see how formidable the passes are. This is Masataga Mountain that rises beyond 7,500 meters, that is in the Pamirs. So you go through very difficult terrain in order to get out to this frontier. Some of them are political emissaries, others are monks that goes for the Buddhist sutras in India, and others are just traders, especially those from Central Asia to the Middle East, all the way to Europe. Now, despite of the difficult journeys, many traders goes out there. And because of the difficulties too, before they leave for the desert, they start carving up these caves to make some statues praying to the Buddha and to all kinds of God and deities for a safe return. So over the centuries, Dun Huang, just guarding the eastern side of the Silk Road, has now 493 grottos, caves inside. And of course, also all the famous murals that extend for 25 kilometers. I started working in Dun Huang in the late 70s and has written for the Asia Society magazine and stuff, but now we actually have a center for operation there for the Silk Road area for us. And now, you just heard about earlier on that I said as the Western Han Dynasty before Christ. By the Eastern Jin Dynasty, a famous monk Faxian, that was the year 399 AD, he together with 10 other monks left Xi'an and went on also on their pilgrimage to India. And he ended up going for 15 years and went through today's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, ended up in Sri Lanka, and successfully brought back something like 600 volumes. Many of those has never been before been translated in China. Now that was the normal trade route that you're going to go to, let's say, India or further west. Now after 15 years, when he was trying to come back, at that time, just at that dawn of having the sea trade, he ordered a boat that is good enough, large enough for 200 people, and start sailing back towards Guangzhou. But ran into a storm, instead ended up in Java. So he waited 5 more months for the monsoon to pick up again, then took another boat, supposed to go to Guangzhou again, ended up in Qingdao. So that's how things were in those days and the early times of maritime trading. I think one of us here, Marcus, may know about the resurrection of one of the boats down there, but that's the Tang Dynasty boat. in Indonesia waters. So things were very difficult. Then by the Tang Dynasty, you have another pilgrim monk, Xuanzhuang, and this is the year 629 now. He's famous for what we call the pilgrimage to the west, the Monkey King story. That's the fictional part. But the real life monk went with a few of his helpers all the way again to India and retrieved sutras and brought back to Xi'an and lived there in the Big Ganda pagoda and translated those sutras. He went for 16 years. So you have the 13 years guy, 15 years guy, 16 years guy that went on those kind of long journey. By the Yuan Dynasty, we have Marco Polo coming back through the trade route. He came to China and stayed 17 years. Of course, his work is far more familiar to many of us. Now, the Ming Dynasty, we have Jing He, the seafaring admiral. Many of you have read about 1431. And by then, time has changed. Maritime trade is much more popular. In 29 years of his excursion, he went down to the South China Sea all the way to the eastern coast of Africa 7 times. So it becomes far more safe, and let alone that he's a Muslim. Okay, maybe he's smarter and he knows a lot more about navigation skills through the Arabs. So those were the early years of trade, and it's very dangerous. The two monks in their writing of their record of their travel in Western China, how they find the way. They don't have a GPS, they don't have a map like we have. They were following the bones of dead people and animals. That's how they can find their way there. And also, a lot of times, there are a lot of bandits along the way. And in fact, the government, the court, consider traveling out without a permit is considered illegal. So, like Xuanzhuang of the Tang Dynasty, he actually has to only travel at night, sneak through all the control points. It's not an easy way, be it for religious reason or for trade reason. For trade, they're always trying to buy a paper saying that they are on a voyage of tribute. In fact, by the time that you use that tribute, you don't get taxed along the way. By the time you get to Xi'an, the capital, the emperor will reward you with better gifts anyway. So there's all kinds of ways about the trade in the early part of the Silk Road. Now, just to give you an idea, like these are the grottos in Xinjiang. Inside many of the grottos, despite having some religious painting, there are pictures of people that looks like features from west of China in Central Asia. Some of these images were people with a turban. So it also depicts banditry along the way. So now, over the long history of the Silk Road, there are many of these remains of relics that you can study about the history of the Silk Road. And so trade was a very important part. For example, even by the Ming Dynasty, of 600 camels that arrived in Samarkand in a month, 300 of them were carrying rhubarb. It was all I have actually recounted many of these figures in my book, which was considered a major medicinal ailment for all kinds of diseases in the Middle Ages before in the West they learned how to grow it. So you can imagine that how much of the trade are going on. Just one commodity takes up 300 camels in 1 month alone. And in fact, by the Qing Dynasty, during the time of Qianlong, he was going to stop the export of rhubarb in order to pacify the western frontier. So sometimes at different times of whether the political ebb and flow, this trading becomes very important. It's like the embargo these days, what we have in contemporary politics. Now, silk, of course, is a major merchandise that went west. And China used to guard that secretly and don't allow people to bring that technology to the West. Story has it that, in fact, at one time, in order to pacify the West, a princess was married to the Central Asia. And the king sent a messenger to the court of China and said, you better bring some of the secret of silk making if you want to wear fine clothes, because we don't have that technology. And there's search points along the way. So the princess, in order to bring that technology, hid the silkworm eggs in her head, in her headdress. And no one dare search through her body, so she successfully brought that to the West. That's how legend has it. But many of these sites along the Silk Road, even up till 20, 25 years ago, are still using traditional way to reel silk and to weave it in traditional pattern. These were taken almost 30 years ago in the Southern Silk Road. And weaving of traditional carpet, and these are silk carpets of Khotan. So that, in time, has still been honored. Now, many of these traders came from Central Asia and the Middle East. They ended up being in control of a number of trades, like the fur trades and blacksmith. They're very good at making jewelries, knives, and all kinds of. This is a jewelry maker. So there are certain type of particular traditional trade that they are very good at, that are a long tradition from the Middle East. And of course, they don't only sell it to their own kind, they sell it to the Han people, even to the Tibetan. Most of the Tibetan trade in jewelry are all made by the Islamic people that came through that trade route. There are plenty of fruits that goes back and forth. Grapes were introduced to Western China, which later on they not only sell in the market and make into raisin and wine. And of course, you know, the kind of bread that they eat in Western China is very similar to those in west of the frontiers. The kind of cuisine that they have, and of course, things travel back and forth. So, you know, we always still like to believe that's how Italian learn how to make spaghetti, is from the Chinese. So, of course, you know, in those days, Marco Polo is actually an exception. You know, he went all the way from Venice to the court in China, in Yangzhou, and became a courtier, supposedly. One time I was put on TV, on CNN, and argue, I can't remember BBC or CNN, argue with Frances Wood of the British Museum about her book, you know, that Marco Polo go to China. But trade went back and forth. As I said, Marco Polo is an exception. He went all the way. Most of the trade were done like a relay, not a marathon. So you have many of the middlemen. In fact, many Chinese governments sent an emissary. When they get to the Central Asia and the Middle East, they were turned back because people would try to dissuade them from going any further, saying that you need three years of provision in order to get to Europe, which isn't the case, of course. So the middlemen really tried to control the trade in between. And now, I earlier said even as early as the Eastern Qin Dynasty, they were already trying to sail back from Sri Lanka back to Guangzhou. Why Guangzhou? Guangzhou is considered one of the earliest sea trade places from the Middle East. This one looks like a minaret. Used to be the lighthouse of the Guangzhou Mosque. Now, as far as we know, the first mosque to be built in China is the Guangzhou, we call it Guangkashi. And it was built already during the lifetime of Muhammad. Supposedly, his maternal uncle first have this particular mosque built. This one, the one in Quanzhou, and the one in Xi'an are three of the earliest known mosques of China. And they have their own type of martial art. In those days, you have to defend your territory. Now, just to give you a figure of even the Tang Dynasty, now this is talking about 651 now, the year. By the time of the Huangqiao uprising during the Tang Dynasty, there were so many foreign residents in Guangzhou that 120,000 foreigners were killed in that one uprising. The Tang Dynasty, many poets write about the foreign population there. There was supposed to be over 10,000 families of foreigners living in Xi'an in those days, the capital. Now, many of them opened hostels, restaurants, even the famous Tang poet Li Bo wrote about them. The Imperial College has over 8,000 foreign students. So it was time and epoch of an era that is really, you see a lot of interchanges between Central Asia, the Middle East, all the way, well, occasionally to Europe, to the Roman Empire. And so Now this is inside the Guangzhou Mosque. And this is the women that get to stay in the back. In some of the mosques now, they have partition with a cloth partition for the women. Now, like over in Xi'an or that area, many of the mosques are also very old, and they have their own schools in there. And this is the one in Ningxia. Ningxia is all Muslim too. It's considered a Muslim autonomous province. It's what they call autonomous region, but it's mainly about the Hui people. As far away as Hainan Island, in my days with the National Geographic, I actually undertook this work on Islam in 1984 when it was still at the National Geographic. This is Hainan Island. We visited 2 mosques there. Now a lot of things has changed. Recently we have a project in Hainan Island. The Muslim there has a lot of restaurants and shops all around there near the airport. Before it was 2 tiny villages. Those were the mosques in Hainan. Now many of the mosques are very grand too in Western China. Some of them, like the one in Xining, on a Friday can easily have over 5,000 people attending the Friday service. There are many Muslim groups in China, 10 nationalities. The largest being the Hui. Those that originally may have come from Central Asia and Middle East, married with the Han Chinese, but subsequently became an ethnic group in China. There's slightly over 10 million of them. Then there are also many of them, especially the religious people, the imam and what the Chinese call the ahong. They still can do the calligraphy in Arabic. This is putting up a sign in Arabic on the wall of the mosque. And here's the mosque by the Yellow River in Lanzhou. And in there, they have their own schools too. The older imam, every day after the normal school for the kids, will have their own religious studies of the Quran. So young kids are learning at a very early age all every ritual and the practice of Islam. And now, besides these Hui group, of course, the Uyghurs is another group of Muslim, Chinese Muslim. There's around 7.5 million of them. And then there's also actually 8.5 million because of the census population growth. And like smaller groups like the Salahs, they came from Samarkand to China around almost 800 years ago. That particular one has only around 110,000 people. And the Tajik that we have worked heavily in the Pamirs, they are the only Shiite Muslim of China. All the other 9 groups are Sunnis. The Tajiks has around 25,000 on the Pamirs. We'll get to those later on. So the Quran, despite that many of the people know Arabic, there's some early ones in the shops in Xinjiang. You can find them selling the Quran. And even this Salah woman, the frame on her home to decorate her home is a glass frame drawing of Medina. Now this is the early Quran that the Salah people said they brought from Samarkand, handwritten from over 700 years ago. They came to China following a legend, supposedly looking for a white camel. So finally in eastern Qinghai, bordering Gansu, they found a white camel that is actually, it's just looked like a white camel. It's a rock that looks like a white camel. So they settled in that area. So anyhow, many of these early legends, now you have to go back into the history book to find it. But then the Uyghur people, today some of the mosques, they will look like very much like those in the Middle East. Very basic, large one as well as small ones. And then the architecture. This is in one of the big mosques outside of Tofan. Some of you who has been to Xinjiang may have seen it, the architecture style of these. And it's still very much Islamic. And the ceiling, let me go through these faster. But of course, their adaptation. In one of these mosques here, despite the architecture is Chinese style, here is the Arabic part. Now, my work there started in 1984 for the National Geographic. I brought a Palestinian friend along because I don't understand enough about Islam to be sensitive enough or knowledgeable enough. He was at that time a banker in Hong Kong for Wortley. He was the first Palestinian to go to Eton. Now his two sons are there. We were just there. I haven't seen each other for 20-some years. We were at the book launch together. Unfortunately for him, not like me, I continue exploring and doing my nice work. He ended up moving to Tunisia. All his investment portfolio are in Libya. Last November, actually, Laura Char and a few other friends, although 9 of them visited Tunisia and Libya, so I sent them to visit him. Now he's pretty much in London now, back in London. So anyway, so that was when I was young, and I will explain this was on top of the boat later on, but we used that particular one to float down the Yellow River. It was when I was younger and more adventurous, of course. So we went up to the premieres. This is the foothill of the Masataga Mountain. One of the very first climb was actually supported by Hong Kong at that time, Jardines. I think under New Beijing, they have a climb there. I think Chris Bonington did the climb of Masataga. And these were more like desert in the bottom, the foothill of the snow mountain. Masataga in Turkic language actually means the father of snow mountain. So in that premier's area lived the Kyrgyz and the Tajik people. The Tajik speak Persian-based language. This is the Kyrgyz one in their yurt and their felt yurt, and dress up in their traditional costume. And this is a tug of war in high heels, two sides of it. Now these were taken actually over 25 years ago, some of these pictures. I'll show you the more current ones later on. And they also are very good in falconry. They use giant eagles, golden eagles, to go out hunting. But rather than going out hunting alone, they actually go out in large groups during certain season, comes autumn, October. They will go out in large groups. This particular community borders, at that time when I visited, the Soviet Union in those days. So it's very difficult to get there. I need 6 different permits from the government to get there. Now, in a small community village of 200 households, 150 households keep eagles. So you can see how popular it is, not just as a sport, as part of their economic means during that time of the year. Now, it's a different story because we survey how they actually catch the eagles, how they train them, different ways of doing it, how it affects the performance of the eagle ultimately. But that's a research piece of paper. So these are the felt tents, like the yurts, the Mongolian yurts. The Tajik people, the only Shia Muslim in China. And the women that are married would wear something that is far more ornamental. And then I went to 2 weddings when I was up there. That is the bride there with the veil. And that's the groom here. It's all done inside the tent or these adobe houses. So this is during basically a feast after the wedding. Then you can see the big, huge drums they're playing, and these they're dancing. And then at one time, then everybody stopped to pray, and before food is brought in, and they bring in the entire live sheep to be blessed with, and then they take it out to slaughter and cook it. And I was the guest of honor, and I got the tail part, which is all fat, you know. If you, either you actually get the head or the tail. The head part is very hard to eat too, so you know but those 2 parts are reserved for the guest of honor. Then all night they'll be dancing into the morning. You see someone playing the flute back there. They went to the outdoor to continue the dancing. The flutes are made from a pair of shoulder bones of the eagle. The dancers are like eagle dancers too. They revere the eagle, so you know always play as a pair. Now, so besides the Tajik, as I said, you know, there's also the Kazakhs. And the Kazakhs are Muslim as well of China. They're extremely good on horses. These are some of their saddles. Men are extremely good on horses, and these are the women. They're very good in doing embroideries, including embroidery outside their tents. They also live like the Mongols. Felt tents is what they live like in. Here's someone playing a Kazakh instrument, somewhat similar to the horsehead instrument of the Mongols. There's a story I mentioned in the book too, but it's too long for me to repeat. So these are the Kazakhs, the Salah people that I told you about earlier, the Hui people. Now, they are huge market. In the old days, the bazaars, not only in Kashgar, but in Kuche, all along Akasu, every one of these major market towns has huge bazaar, probably some of the largest in Central Asia. And there's also many of the old relics of ancient kingdoms that are lost to the sands. And when we travel here, you see some of the stopover where the government used to put places to guard these western frontiers. And up till 25 years ago, you can still see these camel cart using just entire wooden wheel. You can imagine that 2,000 years ago, they were using that. But of course, you know, the wheels has been invented earlier on. This is like a grinding mill using kind of a wheel, and then the bicycle, as well as they used like a bicycle to do grinding of the knives. And these huge water mill were done by the Hui people along the Yellow River in Upper Gansu and Ningxia. These are all some of the technology used by the Islamic group in northwestern China. Now these are using the sheep skin, inflating them, and has been used along the Yellow River for long years. Even up till the early part of the last century, in the 1920s and 30s, sometimes you have these made up into entire barges with up to 600 skins, floating all kinds of things, cottons, merchandises, downriver. And by the time they get downriver, maybe to, let's say, Baotou or further, then they will dismantle it, take off the cargo, and then they sell the sheepskin as well. And the people will travel by land going back upriver. I floated down the Yellow River on one of those too. Now, this is the Pamirs. Now, talking about exploration, many of us know about early explorers like Sir Orlstein on the Silk Road, Swinhayden, Przewalski, many of these big names. Less well known is perhaps, you know, Mannerheim, who's the president of Finland, the one that fought the Russian in 1917, and also during the Second World War. Before Finland won independence, he was a Russian officer in the Tsarist army. He went for 2 years on the Silk Road and documented a lot, huge book. His home in Finland is actually filled with his collections of relics from the Silk Road. So I want to show you some of the pictures of what he did there with some of the officials of that western frontier in Xinjiang. Now, one thing I want to mention while talking about this. Recently, as we know that we talk about how thinking that the migration of people into Xinjiang, into the western areas. Just as a nice reminder, before 1949, from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, the last three warlords of Xinjiang, Jin Suren, Chen Xichai, and Yang Zhengshen, all three of these warlords are Han people. Yang Zhengshen actually came all the way from Yunnan. So it's not really a new issue. Li Po supposedly came from Xinjiang too. The first emperor of China, we call Qianyuan Huangdi, supposedly came from the East Kunlun Mountain, which is right on the fringe of Xinjiang as well. So the crossover culture and traffic has been going on for centuries. It's just that more recently it becomes so politicized. All right, so later on we get onto that about the future of Islam and that frontiers. So now, okay, these were the early pictures of Mannerheim. But today the same mosque is like this in Xinjiang, Kashgar. This is the tomb of the famous princess. Here it is, very much the same. Now this is in Tofan. There's it is. Here is how they were playing the instrument, the Uyghurs. And of course we have the same still going on. Here are people praying in a mosque. Now 1908, most of the pictures I took were 1984 and onward. Okay. Now these big wheels from the 1920s, and of course still very much alive. Harvesting cotton, same. in southern Xinjiang. Falconry, of course, I just show you those, very much alive. And this is the famous bridge of Lanzhou across the Yellow River. In those days, they were just starting to use these barges to cross the Yellow River. This is all the Islamic quarters of Lanzhou now today. And this is how it is today. Okay. And the yurts, same of the Kyrgyz people. Now they conduct a sport like the Happy Valley right here, which is called Bushkashi. In fact, during some of those wedding ceremony, every day they have these, which is using sometimes a live sheep, sometimes a dead one. And you're supposed to tuck each other and pull away from it and take it to a designated spot. It's like a polo game on horseback. And of course, that's still very much alive today. You can see the black sheep down here. Sometimes they use a white one. Both the Tajik, the Kyrgyz, and the Kazakhs play this sport very violently. And in fact, they pull at it so hard. I remember when I need to take this picture, I'm actually on horseback too, by the way, to get that perspective, that I'm on the same level. Then at the end of the game, it all got torn out, so you actually have many winners. Now, I didn't watch to the end how the women were doing it, but I presume that they will have the same end game too. So anyhow, so this is the mainly that part I've been talking about, that along that entire frontier. Now let's talk a little bit. We are an exploration and research society, so let's talk a little bit about the exploration part. This is handheld photography taken from the space shuttle by the astronaut. I happen to live near the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena. Many of my friends, including Bill Blythe here, I get to know him through Caltech, in Pasadena. So early on, I worked with a lot of the space scientists. So you can see this is the Taklamakan Desert. This is the southern edge. You can see that some of the rivers running into the desert sand and eventually disappear. So that's how occasionally, because of these rivers from the high snow range that drains down into the desert, you may have oases like Dunhuang and other settlements along the Silk Road. But of course, the climate has changed. The desert has become larger, and many of these has gone underground. From accounts we know from the history of the Tang Dynasty and before, many of these settlements were abandoned to the sands. So that's what Swinhaden and Sir Orlstein went in for the archaeological date. Now, so these are some of the abandoned cities that has been found. But in 1981, the second shuttle flight, Shuttle Columbia, the main mission of this is, the scientific part of the mission is to put on board a spaceborne radar. And this is the cargo bay. Inside is a huge antenna. This is the antenna inside the cargo bay, the spaceborne radar. If you look at this antenna, this is the size of an 18-wheel truck. So it's a huge antenna to beam down to Earth. And then they will take on radar data originally to study the ocean. And by the way, Columbia, we probably, for those that following this space program in 2003, that's the disaster. That's the second one. The first one is, of course, Challenger. Yeah, that's 1986. So we on the second flight of the space shuttle, we have a program on that. I'll explain that later on. So when they came back with those radar images, this is in the Middle East, near Saudi Arabia, plenty of sands. They found out that in the Sahara Desert, they came back with this as a Landsat image, which is a surface remote sensing image, satellite image, compared to the radar image that came back. This is 50 kilometers width. Suddenly, comparing the two, you see in the desert sand, there's all kinds of veins down there. And what are those? So the scientists couldn't figure out. At first, they thought they are mismatching two scenes. Maybe it shouldn't be here, this scene. It turns out that in the very dry desert area, the radar is actually penetrating below the desert sand, picking up former riverbeds that have since dried up. So it penetrates up to 3 meters, 10 feet deep. And they went in for the dig. And in fact, that was one of Sir Rhino Fine's expedition that went looking with these Land Rovers going into Oman. He used to be an army officer in that country, so he knows that area well. So the Jet Propulsion Lab scientists solicited him together for this archaeological discovery to look for the lost city of Quba, which is mentioned in the Bible and in the Quran as the city of Sin. This is Dr. Charles Elachi, who is now currently the director of the Jet Propulsion Lab. He was formerly a scientist from Lebanon that invented that spaceborne radar. He's a professor at Caltech as well. So they went to the desert. This is Dr. Ron Blom. So they use modern technology, and finally, seeing all these roads converging at this point, that today doesn't exist, this road. These are all picked up from penetration underground. They figured, well, how come everywhere, all these highways coming here, where today is a desert? And they went there and do the digging and found the lost city of Quba. So we use the same technology. This is the second shuttle flight. This is Lop Nor in Xinjiang, like a year here. This is actually all dry desert. It used to be a lake until around 1962, then it totally dried up. So with those data, we went into the desert. This is how the Taklamakan Desert looks like in the early 90s. Very difficult, very hot, very dry. Today we're going for a different reason. We've gone in all the times now to study wildlife. Bill Bleich here has been going to the RGS Nature Reserve, the size larger than Taiwan, with 2 families living in there. So everything you have to bring in on your own, your gasoline truck, everything. So this is one of the very last Lop Nor people that we were able to find in a tiny village. And then some old settlement. And we found in the very last spot where the nomads go 1 month of the year, the well is already very bitter. And talking to the local people that kind of have a little shed for 1 month of the year, bringing their sheep there with the marginal little grass that they can get. And you can see the old settlement of the old walls of these. And at that time we were using a lot of metal detector and start digging, because you can see the grid down there and find some pot shard and stuff. In those days the GPS is around this size. But back in the 80s, when I was working on the Yangtze River, it's the size of a suitcase, and you have to wait all day until one time, brief window, you have 3 satellites above you to give you a coordination of where you are. That doesn't mean you won't get lost, but at least when you're lost, you know where you are. That's the important part. I always said, a good explorer is one who's always willing to get lost. If we hit it right all the time, we won't be an explorer. So anyway, that's what we were doing. Then, as I was just saying, 1986, the shuttle disaster. The entire program get stopped for a number of years until 1994. For 8 years, they grounded all the space shuttle. 1994, they flew it again. This time on Discovery, they were doing the radar again. You see all those red lines all over the globe. Those were where the radar coverage covered. And in Western China, West China, or somewhere here, these were done for us to continue looking for archaeological finds. Now this was from that flight of Discovery, September 30th, 1994. It just so happened there was a major eruption in Kamchatka. A photograph from the space shuttle, you can't see anything under the smoke. Using the radar, it penetrates. You can see it very clearly, everything. The same radar that can pick up flooded area under tropical forest in Brazil, because it can penetrate the forest cover. So it's very special quality. These were some of the images coming back from that flight, 1994. Like mosaic, you can put it in your wall, it can be. And these are the desert sand, all coming in one direction. And what we were looking at is something, with all the desert sand, maybe something that looks like a man-made feature that may be perpendicular. Originally, we have all these data to analyze, to go back to the desert for archaeological find. This is 1994. However, other things superseded that. the society get engaged in many of the other crises that we need to handle, conservation in particular, wildlife, culture conservation, architecture. In fact, talking of this area, one of the probably the first victim to climate change may be along the Silk Road. In the very high elevation of the snow mountain is a mouse hare we call piker. Those are, if you go to Tibet, you see those darting around the ground that burrows into the ground. This Kozlov piker was first named for the Russian explorer Kozlov. And it stays right at the snow line, right below the snow line to get away from the predators, because most animals don't want to come up to the snow. But as the snow keeps melting, going higher and higher, the mice move higher and higher. Eventually, it's just like a conical thing that evaporates out of the top, because they won't come back down to the valley, to cross the valley, to mate with others. So that they become one of the first casualty. You know, one of our collaborators, associates in Xinjiang, are studying the Kozlov pikers. Now, this is the big mosque of Kashgar. Many of you have seen. These are far more current pictures taken within the last few years. Things has changed a lot. After the Cultural Revolution, there's a major revival about cultural identity and even religion, the practices. But what holds for the Muslim in the future? Especially when the younger generation coming up, you can see a horse cart with a modern four-wheel drive riding the same street. Women with high heels that dress more and more like Western people. Despite you still have people that are making your shish kebab, traditional ovens. There's also, this one actually is a fast food. Fast food, that's the two word, fast food. So they are starting to serve fast food restaurants. These are the dentist shops. So despite that, life seems to look the same. Some of the old quarters that a lot of people very worry about, you know, this is the better part of those old quarters already. But the high-rise coming up behind it, you know, is all enclosing it. Here's a Ferris wheel in the background of the old town. But some of that, you know, is really quite dilapidated. You know, this is actually not safe if you're looking at it. The earlier one you saw, like adobe was fine. But there are those that are really just like not fit for humans to live in. In the marketplace, there are some of the traditional nuts and fruits and figs and stuff like that. Inside the shops, people are still making more modern dress with more modern design rather than traditional one. The shops selling all these skins and minks are again going into modernizing, just like coastal China. Despite that, you can still find people selling lamb on the street side. We have a Chinese saying, it's hanging out the sheep head but selling something else. So this is one that they were selling all the sheep head here plus all the traditional herb here in the marketplace of Xinjiang. Shaving the head and touching up on your beard, cleaning your hand before meals or going to the mosque. And people are quite relaxed actually still. But you still, in the southern Xinjiang, you still see older lady in a full veil, and like this one too, in just a street market. But what the future holds is like a dark tunnel that we really don't know. I remember when the Xinjiang riot happened, I was just traveling in California in Carmel. And RGS-HK called me and asked, am I willing to get on the radio to answer some questions about the riot in Xinjiang? And I gracefully said yes, you know. But I know it's a landmine, you know. If I answer politically correct or not, it's going to determine a lot because I have many projects in China. In fact, tomorrow night I'm flying to the Ramsala, to Delhi, and I'm going to the Ramsala. You know, most of you may have guessed, you know, who I may get to meet. So it's really, it puts people in a very difficult spot. We know that last year, you know, a lot of media talking about Liu Xiaobo being the Nobel Peace Prize receiver. Well, to be politically correct, perhaps you know the Tibetan, Chinese Tibetan, that is the Dalai Lama. If you put it like that terms, you know he's the first one to receive the Peace Prize. But if you're going to say that in the Dharamsala, it's not going to be very welcome. You know, I won't be able to get through the door. So is Islam going to be a silhouette and gradually eclipse into the future, or is it going to blossom? You know, we really don't know. With all these apparent smile that you can take nice pictures of, with the child growing up, this is a Tajik young boy, and Uyghur people, the Kyrgyz. These are all the future generation of Islam. They still go to the mosque. They're all trained in their ways, but they also go to traditional Chinese school, learning everything from mathematics to the Mandarin, the Chinese language. But in their heart, like they still draw the mosque, you know, here. And I've written in my book, you know, I went on record, I wrote the last chapter is about the future of Islam. I won't give you the whole story if you care to. I think I owe it to my co-author Adele, who's stuck in with his hot potato in Tunisia and Libya to try to sell some books. You know, he received royalties too. So the answer is there. But one of those I tell you is that I think as Chinese, we've always looked at, including the Chinese government, we always look at how overseas Chinese are treated in host countries to define and determine our own foreign policy. If you turn that table around, China has major desire in Central Asia, the Middle East, and the entire Islamic world. And won't they think that other Muslims of the world would look at how Muslims are treated in China in determining their own policy and relationship with China? I can tell you as a fact that as Chinese, we do always am concerned how Chinese are looked upon overseas and how they're treated. So I hope the Chinese government would put that same standard to play, and hope that in the future the Muslim nationalities in China would have a voice from within. This is the final picture I'm going to show. This particular little propaganda thing, well, I've worked in China since 1974, the tail end of the Cultural Revolution. We're used to seeing these little things pasting over the wall. It actually says to 发扬伊斯兰教, so to propagate Islam, fine tradition. Okay, so it's a mix of both the political means of how China apply it, but the message is very clear to propagate the fine tradition of Islam. All right, and hopefully, well, this is the end shot that they're always very musical people, especially the Uyghur. Once you hear the drums and the music, they start dancing. Hopefully, they have something to dance for in the future. And now, CER has projects all over China, including in Xinjiang. We've put off our archaeological exploration project because of many of the more urgent conservation work we need to undertake. But we're spreading all over, even including in Ladakh, which I'm going to look at the project in Ladakh this next week. So this is a huge area for us to cover and for our future generation. So hopefully that ends my story. But if you have any questions, I have Dr. Bleish, who's our science director here. He flew down from Chengdu today. He has worked in Xinjiang as well, even though he specialized in Tibet. So some of the questions I can't answer you, or too sensitive to answer, I leave it to Dr. Bleish. Thank you very much.
Haoman, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. Because he so kindly agreed to do a second talk, we will just have time for a couple of questions. And I will just make a quick reminder, the more succinct your question, the more questions we can have. So, would anyone like to kick off, please? Yes.
Yes.
You mentioned the oil and gas exploration in the Taklamakan area. How has it benefited the Uyghur people, or has it helped to wipe out their culture?
I don't think it's directly benefiting them. I think the government policy has been, over the last 10 years, they do realize that they have a long-term problem in their hand, not only in Xinjiang but in Tibet as well. So traditionally, a lot of government money has been flowing west. They also, the coastal provinces, they're supposed to adopt sister city and bring about changes in those areas. We used to be quite close to Shell. I know Chevron, everybody's down there. Egypt, they're all down there exploring the southern Xinjiang, the entire basin area. Maybe what I see along the way, we've gone all the way to the frontiers, even within the last 10 years, is many of the truck drivers, yes, but then, what does that count? It's really, when you're talking of oil wealth, that's minuscule. And also, I personally think that the oil return is no way commensurate with what the government is putting into it. Direct benefits, I don't see it. We've seen also cases of the Uyghurs asking for their own type of school that teaches only through Uyghur. Then, after graduation, they have a problem integrating back into the mainstream. So you can be very nationalistic about your group as a policy, but in implementation, when the rest of the market is not receptive to this, once you're out in the marketplace, are you going to be just an imam and no? So it's a very difficult thing. But that's why earlier I mentioned that it's not only a 1949 problem. In fact, the warlord years throughout the last first half of the last century was far more brutal in those days. Anyone who cares to read about the early explorer story, be it Swinherding was in prison, and everybody in those areas. It was a very turbulent area. We used to call it the tinderbox of China. Yes, in the back.
Yes, I'm sorry if I missed this in your description. But what is the current status with the ground radar? You showed the images, and then you said you're going to look for the human traces.
Yeah, I said because they are more urgent matter. Underground, they're going to be well preserved. We're going to leave some work for future generations to dig it up. So we're more into trying to take care of the surface problem right now. That we get distracted in many ways. I think we still have all the images. If I have my choice, I probably go back and just continue exploring and doing research. But unfortunately, for the last 15 years, our society has been handling way too many other crises that we need to help, like those hanging coffins that are falling down. If we don't step in, it's going to fall off. So those things, I think if I'm still young and early explorer and wants to leave my mark in the book, I'll go back and do that. But I think now I'm at a different stage. After discovering the source of the Yangtze, the Mekong, and the Yellow River, I think I have to leave some work for future generations.
I would just like to thank you for a wonderful, interesting and fascinating lecture, which has really covered quite a lot of history. And the beautiful photographs that you've shown us, which I'm really envious of. I've been in a similar area to where you've been, but I've nothing like the record of photographs that you've got. And we want to thank you very much. And I've been asked to give you this first edition signed copy of a 14th century Islamic traveller.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Since we take the lecture, maybe we just replay it for the next group. All right. Sorry for the film, huh? That's very nice.